Blitzers? Welcome back to channel. Today we're going to be going over what I thought would be quite interesting and helpful is to know what the best and worst DPM is of tanks going through tier 5 to tier 10, categorized in light med, destroyer, and heavy. So categorized in the different types of tanks, going over which ones have the best and worst DPM. As we obviously know, tank destroyers typically have the best cannons and so forth, which is different. Now, each one of these cannons do have some different aspects. So obviously, I'm just going off of the most common types of cannons used in the game. If you choose a different type of cannon, it does have somewhat of an influence. There's also some other factors like fully trained crew and consumables, and provisions that can help change some of these numbers slightly, but this is just going off of BlitzStar's data and just the basics for what is the best and worst DPM going through tiers 5 through 10 for medium and lights, heavies, and tank destroyers. Now, you may ask, how does this impact your gameplay? Well, when you're in a game and you get yourself in a brawling situation on a one-on-one with another tank, DPM is very important to understand, because if you get yourself in that face-to-face brawling position, DPM is almost about everything, especially when it comes down to if you guys have the same exact amount of hit points. The player that has the tank with a greater DPM will be able to drain your hit points a lot faster, even though you may have a cannon that has a higher average damage per shot. So that will hopefully help give you some aspects. So going off straight in, tier 5, the best for DPM for light and medium tanks ranks as the Matilda Black Prince with a DPM of 2003 damage per minute. That's how DPM, that's what DPM stands for, is damage per minute. So how much damage that tank is capable of doing in 1 minute time frame. Very impressive for a tier 5 tank. For a heavy tank, the best DPM is the Excelsior, the T14, and the Churchill 3, all with the same DPM of 1,753. And the best for a tank destroyer is the Angry Connor at 2,280. So that was actually the best DPM for all of tier 5 tanks, was the Angry Connor. Now, the worst for light and medium is actually the AMX ELC BIS at 1,174. That actually ranked as the worst DPM across all tier 5s. Then for heavy, you have the KV1 with 1,295 DPM. And for tank destroyers, the worst DPM was the M10 Wolverine at 1,628. Going into tier 6, the light and medium tanks with the best DPM was actually what's known in the game as the Star Chaser with 2,192 DPM. Impressive. Then you have the heavy tank with the best DPM, which is the TOG 2 at 2,111. And then lastly, the best DPM for a tank destroyer, and actually the best for all of tier 6, is the Jagdpanzer at 3,265 damage per minute. Very impressive. Now, the worst at tier 6 for DPM for light and medium tanks was the AMX 12T at 1,386. The heavy tank was the Thunder at 1,357 DPM. And for the tank destroyer, which was the worst, was the SU-100Y at 1,851. Now, what also changes the factors of this is also the type of ammunition you use. So obviously, if you're able to pen all your rounds with an HE, that changes some things. But this is just going off standard AP ammunition, or just whatever the standard ammunition is for this tank and its DPM. Going into tier 7, the best DPM for a light and medium tank was actually across a few is the M41 Bulldog the Comet, the T-23E3, with a DPM of 2,849. For the heavy tank, it was the Black Prince at 3,080 damage per minute. And for the tank destroyer, the winner was the Su-152 and the Su-122S. The Su-152 using the 122 millimeter cannon all came in at a damage per minute of 3,352, which actually ranked as the best DPM of all Tier 7. Now, the worst for Tier 7 for light and medium tanks is actually the T-20 at 2,003. For the heavy tanks, it was the Tankenstein, and this actually ranked as the worst DPM, which was the 1,638 damage per minute. And then the tank destroyer with the worst DPM was actually the Blaze at 2,192. Now the Tankenstein does have two different cannons. That is the one with the higher average damage cannon that has that DPM. Going into Tier 8, you have the light and medium tank with the best DPM was the RU-251 at 2,763. The best heavy DPM was the Action X at 2,707. And the best overall across Tier 8 was actually the TD AT-15 at 3,324 damage per minute. So quite deadly if you got in front of that thing. Then the worst DPM was for light and mediums was the AMX 1390, and this actually ranked as the worst overall for all of Tier 8 was 1,865. For the heavy tanks, it was the IS-3 Defender at 1,884, and for tank destroyers was the T-28 Defender at 2,135, which, let's be honest, that is more like a heavy tank. Going into Tier 9, the light and medium tanks that ranked the best was the Type 61 at 3,041 damage per minute. The heavy that was the best is the K91 at 2,737. And the best DPM, not only across all of Tier 9, but actually in the entire game, was the Su-122-54 with an amazing DPM of 4,274 damage per minute. So that is very impressive. And then the worst DPM for Tier 9 for light and mediums is the T-92E1 at 2,100 damage. For the heavy tanks, it was the Mausgen at 2,185. And for the tank destroyers, it was the WZ-111 GFT at 2,533 damage per minute. Now, lastly, going into Tier 10, the best light and medium tank with DPM was the Leopard 1 at 3,667 damage per minute. For heavy tanks, it was the WZ-113 at 3,439 damage per minute. And then for the tank destroyer, this was actually the best one across all of Tier 10, is the Object 263 at 3,855 damage. And lastly, the worst Tier 10 for light and medium tanks was the Sheridan at 2,493, and that actually ranked as the worst DPM across all of Tier 10. For heavy tanks, this tank's not out yet, so I don't know if I really quite count it, but this one's pretty bad. The Kranwagen, the tank soon to come out's DPM in Blitz stars was ranked at 1,911. That's bad. But currently in the game, it's the Mouse at 2,521. And the tank destroyers with the worst DPM was the T-11 OE4 and the E3 at 2,960. So hopefully this helps going over the best and worst DPM of each category. So as you're playing these tanks and you get yourself in a brawling situation, if you have that better DPM, it could really help you delete that enemy faster. Or if you're on the tail end of it and you're the tank with the worst DPM, you may want to avoid getting in a face-to-face or close encounter battle, or just basically a DPM battle in general. So Muffin here, stay cool and keep tanking.